The Canon 5D Mark II was released back in 2008. Now, at the time, it cost around $2,700. Nowadays, you can find it used for about $500. So just what do you get with this 13-year-old camera? Well, there's a 21 megapixel full frame sensor, a very sturdy magnesium alloy body, and a 3-inch 920K LCD screen, which unfortunately is completely fixed to the camera and doesn't rotate or articulate in any way, shape, or form. Also worth noting, there's a mini HDMI input, a mic input, and a headphone jack. Image quality from the 5D Mark II is genuinely good. I mean, you've got that 21 megapixel full frame sensor, you have those really classic Canon colors. You know, back in the old days, 5D Mark II for nearly a decade was like my main camera. That's what I brought with me to every single photo shoot I did. It was always in my bag and it was always my go-to. Now, the only downsides to the 5D Mark II in terms of photography are the dynamic range just isn't as good as dynamic range that you'd find on modern cameras. I mean, just to put it bluntly, like the dynamic range from a GoPro Hero 9 is better than the 5D Mark II. The dynamic range of the phone that you're watching this video on is ironically better than the 5D Mark II. You know, it's not awful, but just know that going into it that it's not modern by any stretch of the imagination. The other biggest bummer in terms of photography as far as the 5D Mark II goes is the autofocus. There are literally only 9 autofocus points and they are all contrast detect. You know, this was long before phase detect autofocus was ever invented and way, way long before Canon's dual pixel autofocus was invented. So autofocus in photography it's just kind of mediocre at best. You know, there were so many times back in the days where I would leave a photo shoot and I would just have like this one image in my mind. It was just my favorite picture from the whole day. And then I'd get home and I'd see it on the computer and realize, oh, it was out of focus. You know, it's like it missed the girl's face and it focused like right on her shoulder instead. And that happened a lot. That happened all the time, and that's just sort of the unfortunate nature of that very old-fashioned autofocus system on the 5D Mark II. You know, anyone considering the 5D Mark II, I would definitely consider using just specific autofocus points, like just pick one single focus point and use that. You'll have a lot better luck, because if you're trusting the camera to just choose one of those 9 points on its own, it's gonna miss a lot. Now, video on the 5D Mark II actually still looks really good. You know, your options are kind of limited. I mean, you've got 1080p at 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second, and that's it. But you have to remember that the 5D Mark II was literally the first ever DSLR to have 1080p video. See, the first DSLR to have video was the Nikon D90, but it only did 720p. And 5D Mark II, I mean, at that time, it was just revolutionary. You know, and likewise, if you use the Magic Lantern hack, you can add lots of features like focus peaking and, quite frankly, tons of other stuff that it's too much just to try and fit into one single video. Magic Lantern on the 5D Mark II could be a whole video in and of itself, so you do have that option as well, but unfortunately, you are still limited to those frame rates of just 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second. I was reading the Magic Lantern forums and they were saying that that processor on the camera just wasn't capable of 60 frames per second, so even after a hack, there was just no way to get that high of a frame rate out of that camera. You know, another thing that you need to consider with video on the 5D Mark II is there's absolutely no autofocus whatsoever. You know, a camera like the 5D Mark II simply having video mode was considered groundbreaking in and of itself. Like, you know, it wouldn't be until the following year, until Panasonic released the GH1, that a hybrid still/video camera actually had autofocus in video mode. And also, spoiler alert, next week's review is the Panasonic GH1, so subscribe for that. But yeah, that's definitely a limitation you'll have to take into consideration. You know, that's the thing. So when we ask the question, is the 5D Mark II still worth it in 2021? You know, even though it's an older camera, you can still get genuinely good photos and video from the 5D Mark II. You know, for someone like me, I love the 5D Mark II, but at the same time, there's also like a ton of nostalgia like tied into it. You know, I've been doing photo and video for about 35 years at this point, and so for me, I remember when the 5D Mark II came out and just how revolutionary it is. But I know a lot of you guys watching this are younger and you probably weren't into photography back then, so you don't have that nostalgia around this camera. And so for you, it's like, does it really even make sense? Here's the main thing. If you're a photographer and you're looking at this camera, yes, you can still get genuinely good images from the 5D Mark II, but you have to be cool with mediocre autofocus. This autofocus on this camera is just not that good, and you need to know that going into it. Now, if you're a videographer, you have to be cool with the fact that there's absolutely no autofocus whatsoever in video mode. If you're constantly behind the camera and you don't mind, then yes, you can get great video from the 5D Mark II, but you've got to know that going into it, and you've got to be cool with the lack of autofocus. Now, if you're someone like me who makes YouTube videos, then this is more of a gray area. Like, it's something simple, but like this shot that you're looking at right here, this is a Canon M6 with an 85mm 1.8 lens. You're not going to be able to film this type of shot if you film alone with the 5D Mark II. Like, the camera's really far away from me. I mean, not only can I not reach the camera, I mean, it's way the hell over there across the parking lot just to get this look. With the 5D Mark II, trying to focus and be on camera at the same time, you literally start getting limited to just wide-angle lenses like 24mm or 28mm so that you can actually reach the camera, set focus, and then hit record. You know, the only other option was like, if you saw any of my original videos, those studio shots back in the old days were filmed on the 5D Mark II, but I actually had to run like a really long HDMI cable out of the camera into my laptop, and then I used that old-fashioned Canon app for computers just to like set focus and then start recording. But even then, like, it's such a cumbersome process that if you're a YouTuber and you film alone, I just don't think this would be that enjoyable for you. There are just so many other steps involved with the filming process that something like this, I mean, I just started filming on a Canon M6 because it's so easy. You know, I can set the camera really far away, hit record, autofocus is spot on, I know it's got me in focus, I don't even have to think about it. The 5D Mark II, in that sense, it's, I don't know, might be a bit frustrating for someone trying to make YouTube videos if you film alone. You know, overall, I think that's the point. Like, the 5D Mark II is still a very capable camera. It's a professional camera with professional features. The only real problem with this camera is the autofocus. Beyond that, yeah, it's a great camera. Like, if it had the autofocus from the 5D Mark IV, I'd just be saying, jump on it. You know, definitely get this 100%, run out and get it now. But with the autofocus that it does have, that's why it's more of like a soft sell for me. It's like, if you're totally cool with that autofocus, then sure, go for it. But otherwise, you know, like you can get a Sony A7 right now, the original one, for about the same price. I mean, that's a full frame sensor. It has better autofocus in photo mode, and it has okay autofocus in video mode. You know, it really just comes down to, are you okay with the autofocus? If you are, fine. But if not, I'd really consider something else. Anyway, I think that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.